Hey everyone, welcome to the Building Excellence Podcast. Today we are live with Robin Siegfried. Robin, thank you so much for being here.
Sure.
Yeah, well, if you wouldn't mind, maybe tell us a little bit about your background and what life was like growing up for you.
Well, I was born and raised in Tulsa, had 5 brothers and sisters. We have not all moved out of town to date. I'm 75 years old and like the Tulsa area. We were born and raised on a house on 23rd Street about Yorktown. And I was educated at Marquette School and Cassia Hall. I went to Culver Academies in Indiana, the military school. And then I went to University of Oklahoma. Life has been good in Tulsa before and since.
Huh.
And I'm still here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I definitely want to dive into the Culver side of growing up as well. But I think it's really fascinating, hearing some of the stories about your background. How did your grandpa and your family wind up in Tulsa?
My grandfather on my father's side was the youngest of 12 children born in Bradford, Pennsylvania. And his father was a drunken person, and his mother was a very religious Catholic lady who, after all these children, she just couldn't take care of all of them with not much income and no help. So they put him in a foster home or some sort of home. And that didn't meet well for him, and so he ran away at 12 years old. And he was headed to Texas where there was oil jobs. And now I'm talking about 1907 or so. Okay. And he was on a train because his father was a train bum. And so he learned the trains from his father, and he would work the trains as a telegraph operator, make a little money, go to the next stop. When he ran out of money, became a telegraph operator locally there, and then worked to the next stop. And one of those stops was Sapulpa, Oklahoma. And he was going to go find a job until he could go to Texas. And therefore, he kind of liked it there and got in the insurance business with a guy named Tom Braniff, who was the founder of Braniff Airways. He was a pilot and flying the mail as well between Dallas and Tulsa and Oklahoma City. And eventually he bought out his agency, became Siegfried Insurance. And Braniff became a pilot and started the airways. And so that's how our family established here.
Yeah, I think it's a very unique story that you don't hear often, but good thing you stopped in Tulsa, or in Sapulpa particularly. Yeah. And it's very fascinating, getting in the insurance business. As you look back, I know your dad, obviously family was involved in that, but when you look back at your parents, how influential were they in your life? And what are the things maybe looking back you really appreciate about them?
Well, my grandfather's wife died when my father was in college, and he never remarried. So I really never had a grandmother. My mother's family were from St. Louis and Detroit, Michigan, and so we never saw them a lot. I see some of them continuing today, but they had no bearing on us growing up. So it was all my grandfather's side.
Yeah.
And I would say that because of alcohol, my parents didn't have a good relationship with with our family doing things. But they educated us well. And by the time we got out of school, we were on our own.
And when you look back, were you able to think back and those experiences? I know you talked about Culver before. I think you have an affinity for Culver and the military backing. What were some things you learned while you were at Culver that, when you look back, really have helped you in life as well?
Well, Culver is a structured place, as any military place is. And they taught you accountability. They taught you an appreciation of other people working together as a team, and whatever you were trying to accomplish, whether it be academic, military activities, as well as sports. And they taught you teamwork. And out of that, you were part of a team, maybe a leader of a team of whatever you were doing, or became a leader. And I'd tell you that probably Culver did the best direction that I probably got, rather than getting it at home.
Yeah. And did you play any sports or extracurricular activities while you were in high school at CASHA as well?
I've always tried to do it to my children as well as what I did. Take a team sport so that you can learn whatever sport you pick to participate as a team. And then do an individual sport yourself so that you can take that sport possibly for a long time in your life, because it's an individual, and you'll learn something about yourself there. So I played football, and I wasn't that good because I was too small, but it was a team sport. And also I played golf.
And how did you wind up at the University of Oklahoma?
Well, all of our family, before and since, had gone to Notre Dame.
Yeah.
And my father was not attentive to us, to myself at that particular time. So, he wanted me to go to Notre Dame. And I really didn't want to, because I wanted to major in petroleum engineering, because that was Oklahoma. And they didn't have that kind of school up there.
Yeah.
And so OU had that school, and so I decided to go to OU. And that was a hardship for my dad, but and then when I got into engineering, I pretty well flunked out of that for math. So I went back into business.
That's great. I know we'll tie that Notre Dame OU connection in here in a little bit. But when you're in college, talking about being involved in business, what were you doing in college? Were you working as well? And what are some of the things you were learning? And then maybe talk how you transitioned out of college and got started in business afterwards.
Well, I didn't work during college. Fortunately, my parents could afford not to. I was on a scholarship for Navy ROTC, and therefore my first 2 years I was in the ROTC program, and they paid for my housing and stuff. And so I liked the military, and Vietnam was a skirmish at that time. And I got caught in the first lottery, where if you didn't have 15 hours of credits in your schools per semester, you were available for the draft, because they were taking every man they could. And I didn't have 15 hours. I was 2 hours short. And they draft overcame the ROTC program, which I was in Navy ROTC, so you're going to be an officer after you spent 4 years.
Sure.
And the lottery didn't recognize that. So I got caught up and got a low number in the lottery, and so I had to join the Army.
Now, was he involved in the Army as well, your older brother Ray?
Yes, he went through ROTC at Notre Dame, and he was before the Vietnam skirmish, and he went to Korea for a year, but that was between Vietnam and Korea.
Gotcha.
So he didn't get into combat, but he was stationed over in Korea for a year.
Okay.
As an officer.
And when you were in college, was he just starting NORDAM, or was he still over in Korea?
No, he came back and worked for our family in the insurance business. And then I came out of college, and he had started at NORDAM as trying to rectify the poor performance.
Mm-hmm. And maybe share a little bit about that. How did NORDAM kind of start within your family, and then when did you decide to get involved?
Well, my grandfather was always a risk taker. He was in the insurance business with my dad at the time. And they had some investors that were friends of theirs in Tulsa who had invested in a startup, which was called Northeastern Oklahoma Research, Development, and Manufacturing. And that's where the logo NORDAM came. So they had two products. They had one product that was a fold-out plastic boat that you put on top of your car, and it could fish two people once you unfolded it.
Okay.
And that failed because after about 20 folds, the hinge would break.
Okay.
So that did not make them any money, as well as they had a contract with Ling Timco bought on a radome antenna on the back of the A-7 Navy fighter, which was based in Dallas.
Okay.
And these guys that started NORDAM were former employees of North American Rockwell in Tulsa. And so that's how they started. They were going to be in the plastic business. Well, the investors of that were my grandfather's friends, and it was going to fail, and they were declared bankruptcy, and they were just going to foreclose and liquidate. And so he went down there, and because he had the insurance on the A7, on the facility, and the A7 contract. Mm-hmm. And it was a performance bond, and they weren't performing, so he was going to have to pay cash on the performance bond to LTV. Well, he, being a risk taker he was, didn't think about this, so he did not forward the performance bond risk to the companies he was representing, which at that time was Standard Accident Company in Detroit. And so he was going to take the hit himself personally. And he thought, well, I don't know anything about the business. I'm just an insurance person. My brother at the time was out of school and working for him as a salesman. And he said, well, why don't we go try to salvage this thing? So he sent him down there to try to salvage it. And then after a year or so, I came out of school, and they said, well, what do you want to do? Do you want to go to work for your brother, or do you want to work in the insurance business? I had worked in the insurance business for a couple of years in the summer of college with them, and I didn't like the way they managed their business as well as I didn't like the industry. Right. You know, you're a salesman, you're selling a risk, and you're selling a negative. Nobody likes to buy insurance because the only time you use your insurance is when you have a failure or a catastrophe. And then you don't negotiate with the guy that sold it to you. They pawn it off on the guy that you underwrote the insurance. And so your friendship is not anymore part of the salvage of the issue because the insurance company takes that. So the relationship that you've built is no longer. I didn't like that. I'd rather have a product that was a piece of hardware. If you didn't like it, you could tell me and show me and I could fix it. So I went to work for NORDAM.
Yeah, and going into that, just finding opportunities. If there's a problem, learning how to fix it. When you first started at NORDAM, you were obviously involved in sales and really kind of went all over to grow the company. But how important maybe was just having the willingness to go and work hard, but also listen to the people that you're going to talk to, and then take what you listen and apply it into a product?
Well, we really didn't have any products at the time. We had this failing boat in this one contract. We turned around that contract, and matter of fact, built it for 30 years. And never had really any issues after we fixed whatever the initial issue was. And so we needed more plastic business. And plastics were new, and composites, gluing things together. And so I was the guy to go out and find stuff. And so I didn't have a product, so I couldn't go knock on somebody's door and say, here's a widget, please buy it. Didn't have any. So I traveled all over the country at that time by car because we couldn't afford airplane travel. It was expensive. And I didn't know where I was going or who I was seeing. So I would just drive down. Dallas was a big place that had lots of business. So I spent a lot of time in Dallas, and not far to drive. And I just go to these big commercial industrial areas and look at the signs. And then I'd go to the Chamber of Commerce's and books and define what that company did. This was way before electronics and the internet. For searches, you had to go find paper books. And then I'd call on him. And of course, you'd get kicked out a lot. And you'd find out some of those process had plastic parts, and I was just looking for plastic parts. And we were basically in the fiberglass business. We didn't have machines that counted out widgets or anything. So, we looked at the motorhome parts. We looked at boat parts. We looked at satellites. We looked at lots of things. And finally, American Airlines came through here in Tulsa because they're a big employer. They had a junkyard, and I went to their junkyard to see if they had plastic parts that they were throwing away or maybe were repairable. And I found some of that. And that was really giving us a start, is repairing wing structures for American Airlines. So we took that concept after we kind of got our approvals with the FAA and the necessary legalities and said, hey, later they like us, let's go somewhere else. And so I traveled all over the world selling the concept of repairing flight structures for airlines around the world. And it did us pretty well. Yeah,
I'd say so. But kind of even going into that story, you didn't have necessarily a background in engineering to being creative and building these components, right? But
no.
Did you have more of like a figure it out mentality? We'll just figure things out as we go?
And that's the way our whole company was based. We just said, bring a part in and let's figure it out. or bring a sample of another guy's part that they didn't like. You know, one of the strategies I used is I'd go to these big places and they had a waiting lobby where you ask for Joe Blow to go see him, and he may have been a purchasing agent or an engineer or a maintenance technician, and there may be 20 people waiting in the lobby to see someone. And I was always the youngest guy, and so I just go down the chairs. The people were sitting there, mostly were men, and I'd say, "My name's Robin. What do you do, and what are you selling, and who are you seeing here? What's your product?" And we'd have a nice conversation, and and then I'd go back the next time, and the next time in another area, and another company, and the same guys would be sitting there. So we'd become friends. And when I didn't have anybody to take to dinner, I'd go out and take him to dinner. And it just started networking. And these guys were 30 and 40 years older than me, but they were very experienced sales representatives. And after a while, I learned from them. And so I said, "Well, you're here locally in the region selling these guys. Why don't you sell me? Because I've got too many and I don't have any salesmen." So that's where I started in agencies or sales reps. I met them in the lobbies. And eventually I hired some of them full time to represent me in those particular locations. Now I did this all over the world. And so it was like adding another salesman, but he was part-time. He was an agent and had a book of companies that he was representing. But he had the relationship with that company in his territory more than I, because I didn't have time to go there. And we had companies that we established that did that with agents all over the world.
Yeah.
And it's developing relationships. And those guys had it.
Have you always been good at doing that?
I think so. It got us there.
Yeah.
You know?
I know it's done well for the company, but just the natural curiosity of being able to step into a conversation with people that are in the room and just have that awareness just to meet someone.
I've never been bashful.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes it gets me in trouble.
But it's a good quality. The more people you know, the better, and you can learn something from everybody and build relationships. So now you have these relationships all over the world, meeting different people.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot to be said from that. But going into that a little bit, obviously you started working on, the wings of aircraft, working on preparing those. What were some of the next things you guys were doing and some of the products you guys were doing that were different and new for the time that was going on?
Well, we were in the plastic business, and then when we got into the airlines, that put us more in the metal business. And then we were bonding together, gluing things together with composites. So we were taking fiberglass and composite lightweight structures and gluing those together or riveting them with metal parts. And so we just said, let's think out of the box. And we got into more products, more services. One of the things I did is when you got a good relationship with a particular person in a big company like American or Eastern Airlines or something, he felt comfortable with you, that person. And he may have been in engineering, he may have been in maintenance working on airplanes, or he may have been in the purchasing area. And I'd say, who are your top 3 vendors that you don't like, that you can't get services from? And every one of them would immediately say these three big companies. They'd say the same company. Well, that means opportunity because they don't like somebody. or their product. And I said, well, show me the product and pick out on that product what you don't like. And some of it was not the product, it was the service. They weren't delivering, or they wouldn't answer their phone. And so that was opportunity. I say, if I came up with that same product, would you buy it from me if I had the service? They said, sure, why not? Huh. And sometimes the price didn't matter because they couldn't get the goods. And I'm talking about 1974, you know?
Yeah.
And this is way before the communication methods that are used today. And I tell you what, we probably established 40 different processes of parts based upon that salesmanship. Is tell me what products you don't like.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then we were heroes. And then they'd throw, the same guy would say, you fix this, here's another one. Why don't you go out and look at that? And so those two things really helped us, and helped me. Meeting those people in the lobby, that gave my sales force. And then the relationships developed in developing new products. I wouldn't get that information from those people in those companies if they didn't respect me and have a relationship ability. And you don't get that overnight. You may have call on that guy 20 times. And you may have to take him to breakfast or lunch. You may have to babysit while he did something. I mean, I would do anything. I was so hungry.
Yeah.
And people just don't seem to do that anymore. You know, some people think that that's out of the boundaries. Tell me what boundary that there is to say, you don't like a vendor, I'll take over. That's not a boundary. It's just good common sense in business. He needs a part, I'll deliver it.
Yeah. Well, I think there's lots of good components in that, but also one that I was thinking of as you're talking, and we didn't talk about it, but it's the execution part. So you're taking in all this information, but now you got to execute and perform that service for them, and you guys did. What do you feel like you guys were able to do effectively to be able to execute effectively with your team, with you and your brother leading the company? Like, how are you able to get your team to go and execute in a timely manner that accommodated their requests?
Well, that's the hard part, too, in that becomes operating people. The people on the floor. They have to have the willingness to think out of the box. And you got to bet them, you got to back them up in spending some time, and call it R&D, or wasted money, in that you don't have a product and a price list. And if you buy X amount of widgets, then you can have a discount on the price. We didn't have any widgets.
Yeah.
And so you had to figure out, engineering-wise, quality-wise, certification-wise, because we're in the aviation business, all of that. So you had to develop a team. And some of the customers we even had started going to work for us because they saw that we were fix-it people, that we performed, and that we were growing, and we had more than one product. And so people started wanting to join us because they saw a growing company. And so it became fun. And it became all relationships. You have to have a relationship with the customer, with your banker, with your operational people on the floor. I mean, I made a habit, at least weekly, I'd go throughout our organization, just walking down the manufacturing facilities, telling Bob, Dick, and Harry, thanks, how you doing, and you get to know them. Yeah.
I think that's an important piece of just being able to do that, get to know the people. And I think you touched on it before. It doesn't happen overnight. You know, it takes time to build relationships. And relationships are extremely important, not just in business, but anything in life. And so I'm glad you touched on that. But also, too, within your story, you talked about that consistency of going back to those people, even if maybe they rejected you the first time, the second time, the third time, you continue to go back. So there's a resilience or persistence component, and obviously having self-awareness to do it in the right context, and it paid off for you. But as you and your brother, were growing this company, what was it like? Because I know a lot of people maybe have a relationship with family and a business growing together. Like, were you guys kind of synergistic where one person was good at X and the other person was good at Y, and so it really complement each other as you guys grew?
Yeah, you always, if there's one thing that each person should eventually try to get to understand themselves personally is what do you do best personally? Do you like numbers and you're an accounting person? Mm-hmm. Or are you an outside person and develop relationships? Or are you not an outgoing person, so you become a bean counter? And you got to find out what you do best, because when you find out what your attributes are personally, you will then succeed more because you know about yourself. Mm. And then you will be able to have more success because you're in what you do best. So when you find yourself out, you hire people for your weaknesses. So hiring a person that is not so good in an area that is better than you in an area that you're not will help you build your team. And my brother and I, my attribute was developing relationships. And I was not afraid to spend the time and the energy being away from home in somebody else's territory and getting around the roadblocks that you have always in trying to go through the customer. You got to get through the back door sometimes to be able to talk to a person. You got to get him to talk to you, and maybe that's a lunch or breakfast or a dinner. Many people, they want to leave at 5. Yeah, man, that's when it starts. And so my brother's attribute was he was minding the store financially, and trying to develop the operational team, and I was the outside guy.
Gotcha. Yeah. Well, would love for you to talk a little bit about your travels, because you traveled all over the world, met so many different people from all over the world. Where are some of the places you traveled to?
Oh, well,
within your work.
I traveled all over America at the big cities, and then about 1976, we thought that why can't we take this concept in America and do it elsewhere? And so my first trip overseas was in 1976, and I was going to go for a couple of weeks and go to New Zealand and Australia and come back through Japan, kind of do an Asian tour. And by the time I had left Australia, we'd already started getting contracts and parts were showing up. And so my brother said, just keep going, whatever you're doing. And the method of communication then was telex. And, that took a couple of days. And it was very expensive to phone call at that time. And so I ended up being gone 6 months of a planned 6-week trip. And I went around the world. I started in LA and came back through New York. And I think I went through 26 countries.
Wow.
And that gave us a real hit. And so then I started working on how can I sell all these people, and my body can't take, I don't have the time. So that's when I started international agents that were there on the spot. And it worked out pretty well. And I had people that we put in different geographic areas. And that lasted for 30, 40 years.
Yeah. I think you pointed out an important point of being able to scale it instead of having to always physically be present. But also, I think you might have mentioned you love sushi, right? So you would always go back to Japan to eat sushi because you loved it so much.
No, I hate sushi.
Okay.
Matter of fact, the story I had in Japan is I got the customers to take me to dinner, and there's always language issues, but they were taking me to a fishy place of their choice, where you take your shoes off, and you leave them at the door, and you have to sit at this table that's on the ground. And there's all this raw stuff that I don't like at all, and I didn't recognize it. And in Japan particularly, they're very, they want you to participate and recognize their culture. And one of the cultural things they do is you have to finish your plate, and you eat what they say you're going to do. And this stuff was not going to go down my stomach well. And so we're sitting on the table on the floor. You're very low. And when they weren't looking, I was taking this and I'd put the fish or whatever in my sock because we didn't have any shoes on. And we were cross-legged like this. And so when they weren't looking, I threw there, and so I did what they wanted. I'd finish my plate. And so I did that numerous times. And when I'd come back from Japan, I'd just throw my socks in the suitcase, and my wife would unpack and wash things. And she said, when you come back from Japan all the time, your socks stink. What's going on over there? And I told her the story, and she said, throw the socks away. Don't bring them back.
Don't ever go back to Japan.
And that's, you have to study the culture before you went. And it's how to dress. And the hardest thing is to getting to the places because nobody speaks English. And this is before electronics, and so you didn't have these apps for translation. And, usually I'm arriving at an airport and I'm calling back on the airport. And so therefore, you take a cab to 4 miles off the airport to get to a hotel, then you have to go back. Well, a 4-mile drive to a cab driver, he's not interested. Okay?
Yeah.
And so sometimes you'd go through 20 cab drivers before one will take you, and then you have to tip him $20.
Yeah.
And then he doesn't speak English. Those are just things you get to live with and learn.
And plenty of great experiences all over the world doing that and growing the company. When you guys started NORDAM, how many employees did they have? And then today, how many employees? Like over 3,000, correct? Or more?
Yeah, we started with about 6. And there's 2,500, 3,000 now or something. I don't know.
All over the world. And so kind of diving into your career, obviously you guys were growing the company, you did some great things, but I also know you have an affinity for hunting. And you've taken trips all over the world hunting different animals and being a part of outdoor life. Has that always been big to you, and did you grow up doing it, or when did you start getting involved in that space?
My dad was not a hunter. He took me, he didn't hunt big game at all. He hunted birds, did quail and pheasant. I went on a few of those. And I really didn't take to that until when I got in college. I went down to Texas and hunted deer a few times, and it was not a passion for me. It was just something to do on a weekend. And then after I got in business, some of the local people were members out at Big Lake, where we are today, and brought me out here duck shooting, and that was really of interest to me because it was close to Tulsa, where I live, and it was comfortable, and it was camaraderie, and so by eventually I got a membership at Big Lake, and I had a house full of empty walls, and had a few deer mounted and a few pheasant and things, and you know, a guy, my brother and I decided, let's go to Africa. And we didn't know what guns to shoot or nothing. We went over there and took our kids, and we had an absolute blast. And I said, that's too far. So I first started going to Alaska. I wanted to maybe consider getting the North American 30 big game animal. In Alaska, you could get more of those game animals there because it's primitive. And so I started going to Alaska based upon a member that was a Big Lake named Harold Stewart. He introduced me to big game hunting in Alaska. And then after we went to Africa, and Alaska is hardship. It's running up and down mountains. It's cold. And, you know, it's tough. You got what you're living on your back. And I went to Africa, and I've got a place like this every night. 14 people are waiting on you. I thought, this is pretty nice. And so I started going elsewhere besides Alaska. And, you know, I shot over 150 different species of animals, and I've done that all over the world at different places, and there's 7 continents, and 6 of those have nice animals. The 7th, Antarctic, has nothing but a penguin, and you can't shoot them.
Okay.
And my son and I together have hunted in all continents together, getting different species of game. And we try to do 2 or 3 trips a year to do that together now.
Yeah.
But I'm starting to age out.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you brought that up because I think it's important. Obviously, before you touched on the building relationships, and you've gotten to meet a lot of people through hunting and build relationships from that, but also with you and your son, spending time doing it together, like being able to go hunt on all different 7 continents. That's not something a lot of father and son combos can say, which is pretty unique and very cool. I'd also love maybe to talk to you about, I know you've had some experiences where some plane crashes on a fishing trip. If you wouldn't mind, maybe share that story and maybe talk about maybe some takeaways from that experience of maybe perspective that you've had, and just, if you wouldn't mind, share that story.
Well, the location was northern Canada. There was about 14 of us went up there to hunt the migration of the caribou. And they migrate each year, and you try to find a location with some guide services and camps along the migration that you kind of sit and wait for them to come through. And half of us were bow hunters and half of us were gun shooters. In this particular day, we were, it's our first day of a week's trip. We were out waiting for the migration to come through, and we're all kind of situated through the woods. And it's we were a fly-in location. We had a helicopter, a de Havilland Beaver, and a Cessna 180 or something. And we got in we were advised by the camp that a snowstorm was going to come in. And so come home. So by the time we all got arranged and everything, the camp manager had radioed the pilot and said, "Don't come, stay there. There's a blizzard coming, and we're only 20 minutes from the flight from our camp." But the blizzard hadn't arrived yet, but the pilot that was in charge of the 3 airplanes that we were with said, "We'll make it." So 2 of the airplanes did, and I happened to be on the airplane that didn't. And we were in a Havilland Beaver, which is a single-engine, 7-passenger, 1950 designed airplane, which is a workhorse of all of Alaska and Canada. But it does not have de-ice equipment, and the blizzard came. We could see the ground and everything. It just was freezing rain.
Yeah.
And so we crashed into a lake. And it was a horrible scene. And three of the 7 died. I was the worst of the 7 injured. I had broken my legs in 12 places. And and I was in water for 30 minutes, 30-degree water for 30 minutes.
Wow.
Where the survivors had got on wreckage and got out of the water, I couldn't because I didn't have any strength with my legs to swim. But anyway, Jimmy Peelsticker died, who was a friend with us. The pilot died, who was a charter pilot. And the president of our company at the time, Charlie Ryan, died. And it was the luck of what seat you were in. The guys on the right died because it went down on the right side. And so eventually they found me and the others, and we got back to the camp and got us all stabilized, and then they worked on getting me to a hospital, which was 3 flights of airplanes to get to, and eventually I recovered, but I was on a cane for 10 years.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
In a wheelchair for a long time. But it was a tragic scene, and I lived, and I appreciate all the help that I got over the years to recover.
Absolutely, and I think it's interesting too because you've not just been involved in one plane crash, you also had another incident, I think might have been a de-icing situation as well. And then you and your brother were in a helicopter accident, is that correct?
Yes.
Yep, and what happened there on the helicopter accident?
Well, my brother was I was a certified pilot, and my brother was flying because he was learning how. He was not certified yet.
Okay.
And so he had the controls by his request, and we were flying to Chandler, Oklahoma, to go on another hunt. And basically we were landing into a hunting house like this. My brother lost control upon landing, and we rolled over, and it exploded. He hit so hard that the gas tank exploded upon hitting hard, and it immediately caught on fire. We both got out. I broke my back. He cut up his lips because he ate the cyclic, which is the thing in between your legs. And so that was what destroyed the helicopter. It blew up. But I lived again.
Yeah, there's been a couple of situations like that throughout your life, and I'm sure you've probably been asked this before, but As you've gone through those experiences where near death and then even the recovery process afterwards, what goes through your mind when you're going through an experience like that? Like, how was that experience impactful? Like, with perspective, maybe. Did it give you a new perspective, or maybe not?
Well, after 3 times, it gives you, you hopefully you learn. People say, well, how do you get in an airplane again?
Yeah.
I question it sometimes, especially the small ones. I don't a lot. But, you basically after the big crash in Canada, I looked at myself and I said, how many times do I have to do this? And my life now, as I was 55 years old or something, I said, maybe it's time that God is telling me that I should do something different. And so I started then getting in, downsizing myself. And you look at what is all this worth, all this time and energy and the assets you developed. And is it all that much fun? And you look at what you've accomplished, what's going forward, how long it took, and how meaningful is it to you now, and you change your life. It did for me. And so that's when I started hunting harder.
Yeah. Hunting harder and being with people that you care about, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And I love, as we kind of start winding down, I'd love for you to share some stories, because I know probably there's OU fans on there, but I know you and your brother, you were very involved with University of Oklahoma and became on the board of regents. And then obviously I think your brother was on the board of trustees for Notre Dame.
Yes.
Okay, and I know you guys kind of got the Notre Dame OU football game back. But also, too, I think there might be a story where I would say you and some of your regent people were pretty important on getting Bob Stoops to the University of Oklahoma. Is that correct?
Yeah. Going back to, we did get scheduled OU and Notre Dame for the first time after Bud Wilkinson lost to them in, I think, 57 or something. There was some bad blood developed at that time that carried over to one of the schools, and I never could figure out which one. But they wouldn't play each other again. And this is before Notre Dame decided they'd go to bowl games. So you didn't get matched up.
Okay.
And so we kind of made that happen, and it became a 3-game series. And this was the first series of the game. And so we worked hard at that with the respective schools and the athletic directors. And so we decided, well, let's go ahead, let's make a bet.
Okay.
So, the points, we decided there was no points. It was who's going to win. So we bet $1 million.
Okay.
Just my brother and I. Okay. And the loser had to wear the jacket of the color of the winning school for a year to any event that our companies had together that we were going to show up with the patch.
Okay.
And then the money went to the other school, the winning school, in the brother's name that lost. And so I lost. I had to wear the jacket, and I had to give Notre Dame $1 million.
Okay.
And so as part of building our business, one of my traits I think I learned is I was a turnaround guy. We didn't find all our products in the market. We bought some. But the companies or the products we bought were mostly were broken in some way. They either didn't have a market, or they had a deficient product, or they were financially insecure, or whatever. And they were all in the markets we knew, which was aviation. And so we probably did 40 or 50 of those in my career. And, you know, I became a turnaround guy.
Yeah.
You hire these people and you figure out what the problem is and get it turned around financially and in the marketplace. And so that was fun doing that. And so Frank Keating appointed me, who was the governor, to be on the board of regents at OU. And when I got there, this place was in shambles. They just didn't have anything going for them. The leadership was horrible. And so maybe that's why Frank put me on there, and so I started getting involved in another turnaround, even though it was not a product. It's a product, but it was education.
Yeah.
And so, you know, the first thing that people look at in a university is usually the athletics, because that's what they hear about, you know. There's a whole section in the newspaper just on athletics. It's not on education.
Yeah.
And so they were broken in every way. The athletic department at that time, and I'm talking 1998.
Okay.
Its whole budget at that time was about $20 million for the whole athletic department.
Wow.
And it was losing $20 million. In the state of Oklahoma, how it's established is that for athletics of a state school, which OU is, the education part cannot fund anything to athletics. So athletics has to stand on its own. But they cheated a little, and the university was owed $20-30 million out of the athletic department, and they weren't paying that back, and they were losing themselves money. And you know, some of the alumni were funding the deficits by not knowing that this was not public information generally, unless you really drilled down.
Yeah.
And so I immediately, in that particular area, decided that, you know, we need some new leadership in the athletic department, as well as a lot of the education area needed leadership. You know, new deans and things like that. Needed a new president. We got David Boren. He's the best thing that ever happened to there. And so the first thing you do is you got to find a leader. So we found Joe Castiglione. And he came from Missouri as the AD, and he is still there, and he is outstanding. And so then you go through coaches and ended up getting Bob Stoops, who's done really well, and he was not a head coach at the time. And the other people coaches that we looked at were head coaches, but in the interview process, he just gave you a good feel as to he would do better than an established coach, so take the risk.
Yeah.
It worked.
It's paid off pretty good for OU football, and Joe Castiglione.
Yeah.
Those are great guys that have really done a great thing for OU. But I think that's a really fascinating point. I think you guys were able to get Bob's plane diverted from going to Iowa before. So kudos to you guys, because he might have been a Hawkeye. So you just never know. But
another good story I got is I was involved in raising money for the whole school, but I was part of the business college. And so when I was raising money, I raised $650 million over 5 years for the whole university. And when I was going through some list of graduates, I found on the graduate list of the OU College of Business this guy named Michael Price. I said, where do I remember Michael Price from? I said, we used to party together. And we gaitored together is where we met. You know what the gator dance is? Where you get on the floor and you're acting like a gator. You got to be drunker than hell to do it. Got to be the right music. And so he was from New Jersey, and he came to OU from New Jersey not knowing anybody because he liked the wishbone quarterback. He liked the wishbone, and he liked football, even though he was not a player. And so we got to know each other, not well, but it was always party time. And so I found him on the list, and I said, we got to talk to him, because after he left OU, he went to work for a investment banker, and the guy died when he was employed there not very long. He took over his business, and Michael became a billionaire. And you would never thought that he was going to be a billionaire. So I called him one day, and I said, Michael, you remember me? I said, gator at these particular bars. He said, yeah, I remember you. Well, long story short, Michael Price is now the name on the school. And I went to his wedding and gatored at it.
That's great. You guys need some statues doing the gator out in front of the business school.
That's right.
Yeah, those are great. Yeah, great stories. And you know, I just want to make sure we honor your time. And I wish we even had more time to talk about all these great stories. And obviously, they're in your book, so if people want to check out the book, that's a great way to do it. But I love, as we wind down, I love to hear kind of your perspective first on maybe being a good father and what that means to you and why that's important to you.
Well, it's, you know, everybody wants their offspring to do the best they can be. I had 2 children, and one of them was born brain injured. And that taught me patience and the ability to take the cards that you're drawn and deal with them as best you can. He lived till he was 40. His name was Roman. And he was 24-hour care. Couldn't talk, couldn't walk. But he could smile and taught you how to deal with negatives and to have a better life. Another son I had, Reagan's the one we've been talking about. He's his younger brother. And I would say that having, he didn't have the medical issues. And I would say that having the first that had issues made me a better father in a different way, in that you have to make your children accountable. You have to make them respective of every other person's quality of life. You cannot treat people any different whether they have money or color in their skin. You have to treat everybody the same and treat yourself and manage yourself accordingly to that. And so that's what I've tried to do with Reagan. And I will say, and he will say, there's probably, if you can have a perfect father-son relationship, we have that. Show up on time, Don't be afraid to speak out when something may not be so right. Be accountable, and respect your friendships. Pick your friendships to where they're the right ones. It's not going to lead you off the wrong path. I've established goals with him, as we did in our company, since he was 12 years old. They were all goals, action steps, and measures. Every quarter we'd sit down. And how do you do that with a 12-year-old? Okay? So you have to modify them to the point. We had one on respecting elders. It had, listen to me when I want you to not be with some of your peers, that they're bad influences. I'm not telling you can't play with him, but the reason why I'm telling you this was a bad influence for whatever witnesses I could make. I had one on sex. I had one on treating of your dates and your women properly. Had driving rules, drinking rules, and all that. There was only 5. And, he broke a few, but generally he did them all. There was one on grades. You have to graduate in 4 years and go to college. I don't care if it costs you summer school. That's okay. But don't be a professional student.
Yeah.
Okay? And I'm not going to give you a new Corvette or a car. We're going to give you a practical car when you're a freshman. And you got to take it all the way through college. And so you better get one that's going to work. And so through that process, he did really well. Made his grades and all that. So he gets a job. He's out in Arizona, and he's working for Goodrich Aerospace, which is a competitor in NORDAM. We don't hire our children for at least 3 years going in. They have to go back and get a master's and everything if you want to be employed. There's certain rules. And so he was doing this process, and he was in the finance department. And so he has this new boss, and they have goals. And so when he gets this new boss, he comes back for the first review. And in 10 minutes, this guy gets an A. He said, how you approach this whole thing is so good. I've never had, this is his boss speaking, I've never had someone so polished as you in goal setting and action steps in the interview process we're going through in the review. Why are you so good? He said, you never worked for my dad.
That's awesome.
He said, I've been doing goals since I was 12. He said, I want to meet your dad.
That's great. And that's a great story of just time together, building relationships, goal setting, doing those things, and having that relationship like you talked about. There's so many things we can do in life, but having that is super important and very key, and it's awesome that you guys have that relationship. Well, the last question I have for you, this podcast is called Building Excellence. What does building excellence mean to you?
Well, I've done pretty good for myself and others. I've surely made my mistakes. As long as you admit those and try to improve yourself, you're better for it. Be accountable. Be accountable to yourself and to the people you're dealing with. Goal setting is very important for an organization. Most of them don't do it. If you do them right and you don't use them as a beat-up session, goal setting and action steps and measuring everything is will get you to improve because it tells you what your fallacies are. And all those things will help you improve yourself, improve your people that work for you, and the organization as a whole. And, being excellent is probably a stretch for most all people, but as long as you strive to improve and grow and take your licks and learn from them, everybody will be better.
That's well said. And Robin, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, for sharing your story, the lessons you've learned, and the impact that you've made in the relationship you have with your son. And it's cool to be, if people watch this on video, it's pretty awesome to be around a lot of those hunting experiences that you've had. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And it's been a great, fun life that I've had. I'm working for my son now, free of charge, managing his farm.
There we go.
So that's what I do. You got to work hard. Play hard, work hard, do it all.
Yep. Awesome.